Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News, the South Florida Conservative News Center. It's Saturday, October 4th, around quarter to six in the evening. And I don't know why leftism ruins it for everybody, but the culmination of the left destroying most interesting things in culture is now being seen in the Riyadh comedy extravaganza, which, if you go on to YouTube, especially, every third-rate comedian that did not get to go is bitching about the sellouts that went over there and did Riyadh and did this other thing for Saudi Arabia, and they're complaining that nobody should have gone. Shane, whatever the fuck his name is, he's the new thing for the next month or two. He didn't go. Some other people, but a lot of top names, Dave Chappelle, that asshole Bill Burr, a number of other guys went. It looks like a great show if you could have afforded it. I would have gone to the show, put in my earplugs through a couple of them just because I don't like them in general. They're comedy, and let the thing go. Well worth it. Yet another showing that the Arabs are trying to show that they're not quite the stodgy head choppers and bomb throwers that we knew them all to be for a number of years. And it just is, like I said, the hypocrisy level has gotten even higher. And you'll say to yourself, well, if you've noticed as I have, if you're a younger person, you won't notice it so much. But I grew up with Richard Pryor live on the Sunset Strip. You had stuff like that. I even remember my parents had Red Fox records. Red Fox was possibly one of the dirtiest comedians that you have ever heard in your life. But if you only knew him as Fred Sanford, the same with Aunt Esther. Aunt Esther was said some pretty graphic stuff in her day, and they were funny. And the thing was, back then, you could be dirty funny or regular funny. Flip Wilson was funny. There were a lot of people, Bob Newhart, things of that nature. So you had your clean comedians, you had your dirty comedians. There was some politics, but politics didn't drive comedy. They'll say, yes, it did with Lenny Bruce, but nobody really knew Lenny Bruce. This is going to be one of those things that you have to explode the myth yourself. Lenny Bruce was out for a very short time. He was considered edgy basically because he was zapped out on drugs and booze every time he was on stage. He turned out he was a snitch for the FBI. So there's your hero, right? Big effing deal. He may have influenced some comedians, but I think you'd be hard pressed to hear that come out of somebody like Chappelle, who it was probably people like Pryor. Richard Pryor probably influenced a lot more people, believe it or not, than Lenny Bruce. So, and of course, then you had a more of your thinking man's comedy going on, but there's still some really great guys that don't want to buy into this whole thing, and they've been uh, very silent by not talking about it. And I'm not going to mention their names because they probably have enough problems. And big show like this, we can sway things either way. But the fact of the matter is, this newer generation that does not have as much talent at all and is recycling a lot of things from even from the 70s and the 80s because they figure you haven't thought about it are the ones that are worried about stealing jokes, worried about this, worried about that, hating President Trump, which is always fun, right? They weren't going to go to Saudi Arabia because, first of all, here's the most important. We'll tell you what was said. Saudi Arabian rider, meaning this is what you get when you go there. Do not criticize the royal family. Do not criticize Islam. That was pretty much the deal. Name five popular comics in the United States that do an entire a whole act on either Islam or the Saudi royal family, right? It was a no-brainer. It was easy to handle. There were some people that made joke about Arabs in general, but that doesn't mean that they're Saudis. There's a fellow who's on the list. I can't remember his name, but I think he's from India, and he makes all kinds of Middle Eastern. That's his thing. He is incredibly wealthy, believe it or not, even though I didn't know who the hell he was. And not that means anything, but he plays that whole East, they call it East Asia and the Middle East kind of shows, right? So he knows all their little, they're all, they're all very stereotypical and they all hate each other. They're super racist. So he does this whole shows on that. And you'll have Chappelle, who was huge. You'll have all these other people also big. You can see the article, you'll see the list, doesn't matter. That guy that I mentioned didn't go. A few other guys didn't go. But what this does, it allows the have-nots. The have-nots are now able to attack the haves, right? Because it's all about jealousy. The only one who I think should get a pass and who should be angry about it is Tim Dillon. And they had said it was because he had made a joke about the Arabs and slavery. But honestly, if you want to be honest about it, guys, Tim is a known open homosexual. That doesn't fly in their country. And that is what the programmers were probably afraid he was going to start on. That one or two Arab slavery jokes, it wasn't that, it was Tim being gay. Take it as you will. What would be more offensive to a gigantic religious Muslim audience? A joke about slavery, which they think is funny because they did enslave all those people and we're happy about it, or him going out there and doing some gay shit. He doesn't normally do it in his act, but you could see Tim Dillon doing that. He's got enough tricks in his toolbox to really pull that one off. He's the only one on that list. The other thing that was funny with some of them is the huge amount of Jew haters that didn't get to go. You know what I'm saying? Here was your audience. Can you imagine that? Go on and look at some of these guys that are quote unquote comics, which are just like the funnier guy in your hangout group. Like we have a funny guy where we are here in this conservative group, and we have two funny people, but that doesn't make them comedians, right? Doesn't mean they're comedians. They're funny to us. They're funny wherever, right? Everybody's group has that funny guy. Doesn't mean he's a goddamn or she's a goddamn comedian. And that's what's been the problem that you see with the podcasting, with this and that and the other thing. Honestly, a lot of people blame the rise of Joe Rogan for the huge amount of no talent comics that are out there. Because if you were able to get in under his banner, you were able to get comedy jobs. And, ultimately, half of the people in that area, if Patrice, what the hell was his last name? Patrice Williams? We'll go with that. Big, tall, black fella. If Patrice had lived, Burr would probably not exist to any level. And most of that whole underling group of the Joe Rogans would not exist either because that guy was so good. He was so good, so original, and so off the cuff that he could go there and just do the show. He wouldn't even, you could see him on any number of videos. He did not get as big as he should have because I think he was keeping it real. And keeping it real does to your wallet, it ruins it. So when you're watching this, you have to say to yourself, this is all wokeness, complete wokeness. You can't even have a laugh, right? I can't even put on something to laugh at. And I know like every third thing's going to be Trump. You know it, right? And even like I said, even that guy Shane, who is an anti-Trumper, he's the funniest of the group. He wears the outfit and it's funny. It's funny. He's a one-trick pony. He's got a couple other little jokes in there. But the thing is, you didn't go why. He's like, oh, aren't they the 9/11 guys? Bullshit, you fucking liar. Like you're patriotic now. Come on. Who are you kidding? Who are you kidding? Right? You don't think some of these other people are like, it's a paycheck. If you're older, you'll remember Bruce Springsteen and a bunch of these other spastics. They put a song together called I Ain't Gonna Play Sun City. Sun City was a big resort community in South Africa. And during apartheid, all these major rock and roll groups and R&B, everybody played the Sun City show. It was a big casino kind of thing. So some of them got together with Springsteen and these other guys and jerked each other off and said they weren't going to play there. There were a lot of reasons that people didn't want to play there. 99% of them had to do with business practices more so than worried about apartheid. Queen played there, right? Queen played there. They didn't have a problem with it. You know why? Because they were performers. They realized that sometimes the world doesn't revolve around you. Anyone doing this comedy show is an ambassador showing one of our major allies now, major ally, the Saudi Arabians. You don't believe it because it's what it is. Saudi Arabia is a major ally of the United States right now in the Middle East exclusively, right? And for all you Jew haters, you should be happy for it, right? You should be happy that we have an Arab ally that you could go over there and sit down and smoke a cigar or have a hookah and talk about how much you hate the Israelis and the Zionists and have a friendly face tell you that you're not a psychopath or whatever the fuck you're up to, right? But you don't. And because there's too much, somebody got paid millions. They got paid millions of dollars to do one show. This is like the US Festival payoff. If you remember the US Festival, they were paid millions of dollars to do a one-off show. It had never been done before. That was Wozniak, the smart one at Apple had done that. But that's what I'm saying. Wokeness amongst these people, greed amongst the podcasters who think they are comedians. And where are they all playing? The guy will be like, yeah, the next guy coming up is a comedian and he's really getting to be well known. Where? Never heard of him. And we have comedy shows around here. I've never heard of him. We have casinos around here. Dave Chappelle has played at the Hard Rock. I think I would know if this guy was somebody big. It's on all the television, right? They're all nobodies, and I can speak from experience with my whatever, and then our groups, whatever, under 3,000 viewers on multiple. We're small people, but we don't act like that. When you're small, you're small. You work at what you can work with. These guys aren't funny. They're not fucking funny. But they're making it sound like they're bigger than they are. And this is the problem that we're having with the internet. I think eventually we're going to stop doing the internet stuff, unfortunately, because it's just the people that you're dealing with are becoming so damaged. We get nasty, you get nasty shit on this. But this is a prime example of wokeism and the American socialist experiment, where they all should be over there. They should be doing a whole set on the Jews, right? And I'm harping on the Jews because anti-Semitism is so huge in the United States right now, for those of you watching in other countries, that if you don't, like if I go to a restaurant and I am not hating Jews, people wonder what the hell's the matter with me. If I go to the supermarket, right? They wonder what's the matter with me because I'm not hating the Jews. Because I'm not, Why am I unhappy that Dave Chappelle is making money? I don't care. Some of these other guys whose names I won't mention because you'll never hear of them, they didn't get to go. You know why that is? Because they suck, right? If it was, and then, like I said, Bill Burr was a hero to the left until he wasn't. And that's the problem with setting your sail and floating over into the ocean of left-wing socialist politics. You are a hero until you're not. And when you aren't, you're a son of a bitch. Hopefully you brought in enough money before that happened. That's why you're dealing with these unsettled minds. That's why people are shooting children in schools and blowing up buildings and things of that nature. It's the same mindset, but it's taken forward 17 degrees. And comedy is, like you said, I remember Steve Martin when he was funny, right? He got very French. That's different. He became very continental, as we would say. He became a thinking man's comic, and there is no such thing anymore. All right. It just doesn't happen. There were one or two that could then go to Europe, and he was one of them. I think Bill Hicks, if he had lived, if you remember Bill Hicks, Hicks was a comedian in a different style than 99% of the guys, especially the guys telling dick jokes, right? Versus a Dave Attell, who's incredible, versus a Doug Stanhope, who unfortunately his alcoholism is destroying his ability to really come across like he used to. But I'm sure he knows that, you know. And the thing is, once again, why isn't your manager taking care of it? But that's neither here nor there. We're not here to do uh, a study of what's happened to the American comedics, except for the fact that somebody decided that comedy could no longer be funny, that comedy had to poke at conservative values, that comedy had to ridicule everything in a mean-spirited way. You could tell funny jokes about bad things. You don't want to end up like Frankie, what the fuck's his name? The Scottish guy. Everything's a rape joke. You know, it was funny the first 150,000 times, Frankie Boyle. The first 150,000 times, and he made a lot of money doing it, but it's been done. You know, that ship has sailed. You know, that's just how the stuff is. When there was a time to be experimental, there's experimental, and then there's that bullshit. With the lack of intelligence and a lack of uh, what is the term? See, it's happening to me too. The lack of imagination. Comedy has become a very, very compressed thing. It is no longer particularly interesting. There are the funniest things that you'll see will be the old fart gag, shit gag kind of stuff, Eastbound and Down, you know, all those kind of shows where it's sight humor, sight gags, right? Not a huge amount of mental hopscotch being played because that's what always was good. People that say I have to do this other thing, I have to be unfunny because I'm trying to provoke what? To show how fucking smart you are versus the guys that paid $50 to come see you? That's ridiculous. You know, that's what happened to Springsteen and John Bon Jovi and that other jerk, Neil Young, when they came out on these fake tours that they did recently, or Neil Young's actually a while ago, and did acoustic or talked about some other shit. John Mellencamp, what a tool, right? They came out and they stole your money, right? Stole your fucking money. I know a woman was so upset about that John Mellencamp thing. She goes, he was talking about, I don't know what he was talking about. And we were wanting to hear songs and he wasn't doing shit. Yeah, because that's what's happened to entertainment. Entertainment is now, you should suck their ass for them going out there and doing their job. You saw these old guys like when I was younger, and I remember from the casinos and all that, you know, these Shecky Green types and all the Borscht Belt type guys. They were doing 3 shows a night, 7 nights a week. You know, you looked at the old comedians, it was a grind. You know, you opened for strippers. We used to have a show in Philadelphia at the Trocadero. Philadelphia Trocadero was a strip club back in the old days with the fans and all that nonsense. And you'd have a comedian who came out between the girls and told dirty jokes, right? Richard Pryor started that way. A lot of the older guys came up, and you're dealing with guys that are drunk, guys that are halfway through jerking off. Guys halfway through jerking off is not interested in you telling jokes. He's interested in the next half naked girl getting on because he's got to get this shit done and go back to his family, right? That's the kind of stuff that would go on. But it's just like another thing has been chopped out from under you, you know, yet another venue of, uh, you know, psychic healing. You could sit back and listen to this and laugh. You know, you would laugh at certain, you know, we keep using Chappelle. Chappelle is a modern Mark Twain. Whoever writes, he has a guy who writes with him or for him or whatever. His stories and their stories are set up in a Twain style. He won't probably admit to it, but it is. And he is an incredible storyteller. And people don't even have to, they'll get lost in his story sometimes. And he has meanings and he has this and that and the other thing. And then he'll have an incredibly like laugh out of nowhere scene. That's what you're supposed to do in comedy. You know, there are various others. Dave Attell, same way. Watch Dave Attell, even in the Insomniac. You see any of Dave's, there was a guy who mastered the stage. Nobody wanted to get on stage with that guy. You don't want to follow that guy. That'd be the last thing you want to do. They did a series of shows that showed you this jerk off culture of the comedians. It was called the Green Room. And this is where you'll look at, just watch it for 5 seconds. It's like kryptonite. You don't be around it too long. And there was like four guys with absolutely no talent, including a couple of women who have absolutely no talent, and Dave Attell and Doug Stanhope. And Stanhope's not really talking. So unless you'd seen Doug Stanhope before, you're like, oh my God, who held a gun to these guys' heads, right? But Attell will just roll into it. And if you have never seen Doug Stanhope, he does a one-off bit called, what is it called? Jesus. It's either called football or football AIDS or something like that. If you see that alone, you'll see what I'm talking about. With just sit there and laugh through it. You can put it on 10 times, you'll laugh your ass off if you like that kind of humor. If you like Monty Python, those guys were already canceled, as you recall. I don't know if you were aware of that. John Cleese was someplace and somebody had got all over his shit about Monty Python. He's like, hey, fuck you. We're here to we're funny in our own way. We're not going to listen to you socialist pieces of shit. And he didn't. So, like I said, there are people out there attacking every aspect of your life, trying to make you feel bad about everything you do. And in the inside of them is a big old hollow space. And it's just a shame for many reasons with this Riyadh thing. I personally do not have any business connections to the Saudi Arabian government. So I can't say that I'm speaking on behalf of that, but here was a chance, and it still worked well. The Saudis don't give a shit about any of this other stuff. It worked well. It was positive. Everybody's probably had a great time. I think it's a 2-day event. I think probably had a great time. And the only people that were unhappy were the ones who got left out. Because why would you be outraged? Doesn't hurt you. Doesn't hurt me. I didn't lose any money. I wasn't invited to go to Riyadh and do a show. I feel bad for Tim Dillon because I have a feeling that that's why he was taken off the show, was because of his sex. I don't think it was about the joke. And these other guys that are virtue signaling, fuck them. They'll be gone in a couple of months. I'm surprised that Shane, whatever his name is, lasted as long as he did, but he has a huge front story to get to where he is today. He's been around a while, working in whatever. So now he's got his big moment. He'll go up, he'll say something fucked up about Kevin or one of these other guys, and he won't have the whatever to back it up because he doesn't have that kind of wit. And then he'll go away, because he's doing the bro thing and the athletics thing. And eventually his anti-Semitism will come out again, which is always fun, but it's accepted now, and he'll hide behind the retarded brother or something like that. But what makes that difference? Why should I not be able to say that around them, but they're allowed to talk about the other stuff? See? That's the comedian. It's the difference between a comedian and an activist. But anyway, that's all for now. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll have some more stuff for you in the next day or two. Bye.